Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer stands accused of refusing to condemn the airstrikes on Iran. Is this another U-turn? Consider where he was initially. It's a breach of international law. Now it's a defensive action we're allowed. This is of huge significance, by the way, and we're not making any fun of this because people's lives are being lost and people's lives are at risk. But is it another U-turn? Now, as strikes continued to rain down across the Middle East yesterday, opposition MPs branded Sir Keir feeble for failing to take sides. This was demonstrated on the media round of his senior colleague, the Defence Secretary John Healey. Speaking with LBC's Lewis Goodall yesterday, the Secretary of State was asked if the British government supported the US attacks on Iran, and he failed to give a coherent answer.
We didn't participate in the strikes on Iran. We share the primary aim, not just of the US, but of allies in Europe and across the Middle East, that Iran should never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And my concern now as Defence Secretary is the increasingly indiscriminate attacks we've seen from Iran. They aren't just hitting military targets, but civilian targets like hotels and airports in countries right across the Middle East.
I understand all of that, of course, and I can understand why that's your primary concern, Defence Secretary. But I suppose my question is just a slightly simpler one, which is, does the British government support what President Trump is doing?
All our actions are defensive actions. All of our actions are consistent with international law. We are first and foremost concerned about the position and the risk to UK citizens and bases.
Pitiful, isn't it? Now, Lewis Goodall will continue to try and get an answer to no avail. He wasn't the only one. His Defence Secretary also now on the BBC being asked by Laura Kuenssberg if the government backs what the US has done.
Britain played no part in the strikes on Iran. We share, however, the primary aim of all allies in the region and the US that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon.
But do you believe this action was within international law?
Well, we played no part in the strikes. We just didn't participate, and it is for the US to set out the legal basis of the action that it took. Our first focus...
So you don't know if it's legal? You don't have a view as to whether or not these strikes were the right thing to do and within international law?
So it's for the US to explain the legal basis they're operating on.
But other countries have.
They just take us for fools at times, don't they? Now, last night, around 9 o'clock, we heard from the Prime Minister putting this video on social media confirming the UK has given the US permission to mount defensive airstrikes from British military bases.
The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians, putting British lives at risk, and hitting countries that have not been involved. The basis of our decision is the collective self-defence of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives.
Sir Keir Starmer. Soon you'll hear from Sir Richard Dearlove, who was former head of MI6, and Peter, now Lord Ricketts, former Secretary of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But first, let's go to one of the cities or the regions affected. Emily Schrader is an American-Israeli journalist joining us from Tel Aviv. Thanks for coming on. Emily, what's the news and what's the mood this morning in Tel Aviv? Good morning to you.
Well, good morning. Great to be with you. Another morning where we were woken up here by incoming ballistic missiles. Sirens rang about 7 a.m. And this follows, of course, 2 days of continuous missile fire that we saw across Israel. Now, here in Tel Aviv, we've had several direct hits here in the area, but not just Tel Aviv. We also saw in Jerusalem yesterday a devastating missile attack in Beit Shemesh, an area close to Jerusalem, where we saw 9 people be killed and 30 more injured when the shelter itself, suffered a direct hit. So these are very dangerous missiles we're dealing with here, and a highly escalated situation on the ground.
How well or otherwise is the Iron Dome functioning, Emily?
Well, so far we've had remarkable interception rates. The missiles which have actually gotten into Israeli airspace, which is a minimal amount, if we're being honest, thanks to, the Patriot missile system and other missile defense on the way between here and Iran. But the new laser that Israel has developed was put into use this morning. They said the results were good. Iron Dome has been highly effective. So we're hopeful it remains that way so that, as many people as possible remain safe.
Emily Schrader, look after yourself, American-Israeli journalist, joining us from Tel Aviv, 10 after 7. To Sir Richard Dearlove, who's former head of the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, joining me now. To date, how would you characterise the response and the stance of the British government, Sir Richard? Good morning.
Well, I would... the response is, it's twisted. I mean, look, this is the latest chapter in a war which started on the 7th of October, 23, and... government by human rights lawyers, which is what we're suffering in the UK now, is painful when you see them trying to explain the difference between offensive, defensive. We should have been clear-cut from day one and supported the Americans and the Israelis unequivocally.
If you had the opportunity, what question would you ask of the Prime Minister, Sir Richard?
Why he havered and delayed initially, and why he put John Healey in such an awkward position when the moral issue behind this war is absolutely clear, and we should have had the confidence and the conviction, the moral conviction, to know where our national security and defence interests best lied.
What does the best end game look like?
The best end game may take a long time coming, but a more compliant regime in Iran, possibly a completely new regime, largely created by internal forces of opposition to the theocratic regime which has been so murderous and so ghastly for years.
How do we ensure that Iran doesn't become another Iraq or Afghanistan, Sir Richard?
We can't at this point in time. The problem is when you have had such bloody tyrants ruling a country, it can take an awful long time for the country to recover. It's taken Iraq, 20 years to reach a position where it has a reasonably good functioning democracy. I hope Iran doesn't go down that track. And I don't think it's the Trump intention to completely overthrow the government. What I mean by that is I think we see a new emerging policy in Venezuela, possibly in Cuba, possibly in Iran, where you have a new government or a new group of people governing who are more compliant and easier to deal with. So you avoid that sort of chapter of complete internal breakdown and chaos.
Lastly, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
It's difficult to make that judgment at the moment, Nick.
And how long should that interregnum last, Sir Richard?
Look, I really don't know. This is a terrific gamble, and it depends on, as it were, how the Iranians themselves react. I think the best would be if some military group emerged which was prepared to form a different sort of government. Let's see what happens. It is a huge gamble. We all know that.
Grateful for your time. Thank you. Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, 14 after 7. Listening to that, Peter, now Lord Ricketts, who serves as the former Permanent Secretary of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and UK National Security Advisor under David, now Lord Cameron. Lord Ricketts, thank you for coming on. We just heard from my previous contributor, it is, quotes, a huge gamble. Is it a gamble worth taking? Morning.
Good morning. It is a huge gamble, and as soon as you use military force, of course, it becomes unpredictable because the other side gets sometimes to drive how things develop, which is rather what's happening with Iran at the moment. I mean, I think two things are true, Nick. One, the Khamenei regime was awful, thuggish and brutal, and the world will be better without it. Two, we've lived under a system of rules since the Second World War where countries do not mount assaults on other countries and kill their leaders, because that way leads to complete international chaos. And so I've been supportive of the government in saying effectively that they are not in support of these strikes. Now they're having to cope with the repercussions, including the missiles coming out from Iran, and Keir Starmer finds himself in a different position. Quite amazing to think, if you stop for a moment, 48 hours ago we were only just hearing about the first American strikes. Now we've got a much wider conflict involving Lebanon, involving the Gulf states, and now even involving Akrotiri in Cyprus. So wars escalate in unpredictable ways, and that's what this government is having to cope with.
Is it a breach of international law?
In my view, the assault was a breach of international law, yes. I mean, international law, which Britain respects, is clear that there has to be an imminent threat before you can take the kind of action that the US and Israel took. I don't think Iran presented that kind of imminent threat. In fact, they were at a weaker position than they'd been for years after the strikes last June and the dismantling of Hezbollah and Hamas. So I do not think it was legal. I think what you heard from John Healey was the government rather wriggling in order to avoid saying that. But I think that was the reality. I think they were right.
Lastly, Lord Ricketts, what course should the government chart now?
Well, I think we've got to try and use all our influence in Washington to get this back from conflict to negotiation. Trump talking about weeks and weeks of further war. Trump is very inexperienced in war. He's only had short, sharp interventions which have come out successfully for him in Iran last June, in Venezuela. Now this is bigger, it's much more dangerous. Closing the Straits of Hormuz will have an impact on all of us in terms of oil prices. The Gulf is very vulnerable to continued Iranian attacks. The longer this goes on, the more danger it is. So let's get back to the negotiation which Iran was involved with when Americans decided to strike. Let's try and get some kind of resolution which will allow the people to build a new government which is much more respectful of their rights. But that has to come from within. You can't change regimes with airstrikes.
Grateful for your time today, sir. Thank you. Lord Ricketts, former Permanent Secretary to the FCO and UK National Security Advisor. 17 minutes after 7. Just briefly, Lord Ricketts there mentioning President Trump, a little of what he said last night.
3 U.S. military service members have been killed in action. As one nation, we grieve for the true American patriots who have made the ultimate sacrifice.
Tragically, deaths on all sides, people on all sides losing their lives, a suspected drone strike on an RAF base in Cyprus. What should that British position be? Full support? And is it a breach of international law? Foreign Secretary will join us later.